My first introduction to the ancient astronaut, what was then called the ancient astronaut hypothesis, happened it was either 1969 or 1970. I am ancient, and that was my first year at university. My hair, as nuts as it is right now, was much, much worse when I was younger, and when I was 17, 18, 19 years old. And so I came home for, I think it was Thanksgiving, and my mom sent me to the barber shop. But that was called a unisex hair salon. And it was the person, young woman, cutting my hair, who talking to me, regular conversation, and asked what I did. I said, "Well, I'm a university student." She goes, "Oh, what are you majoring in? What's your focus?" And I said, because I've always interested in archaeology, I said, "Well, I'm taking a lot of archaeology courses." And her response was, "Wow, I've always been interested in that." I used to make fun of my colleagues who were accountants and say, "I bet you when you were a kid going to accounting school and somebody asked what you did, you said accounting," that they never said, "Oh, I've always been interested in that." And I would make fun of them. But so when I said I'm archaeologist, I've always been interested in that, the next thing she said was, "What do you think about that guy who says that extraterrestrial spacemen built the pyramids?" I got to be honest with you, I had never heard of that nonsense. And here I am sitting in front of a person with a very sharp pair of scissors in her hands, and I think maybe she's a little crazy. She said, no, there's a guy, he's written some books. And I thought, I've got to check this out. I'm an archaeology student after all, and I actually found a copy of one of Eric von Daniken's books at a used bookstore for like a nickel. And I read it, and I said, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. And I think it was from that moment I decided I'm going to get every one of his books. I'm going to read every one of his books, and I'm going to find out what's at the core of the ancient astronaut hypothesis. And fast forward 30 years later or 25 years later, and I start to write a book. And one of the chapters in the book, this is Fraud's Myths and Mysteries, Science and Pseudoscience and Archaeology. There I am, shamelessly flogging the book again. One of the chapters is about ancient astronauts, ancient aliens. So the ancient astronaut seems to follow me around wherever I go. This was in this lovely place called Sedona, Arizona. It's a beautiful town, gorgeous red rocks all over the place. Just outside of town is this lovely place called Palatka. Palatka is a cliff dwelling. It's probably 600, 700, 800 years old. Native Americans who lived in the area that today we call Sedona built their structures in the cliff face. And it's a great place. It's administered by the federal government. It's a federally administered site. So I'm visiting there. I've been there several times and getting a little tour from the volunteer. And we see a group of people trudging up the hill, walking up the hill with their walking sticks and big brim hats because it's pretty sunny. And they arrive at the site and they want a tour as well, which is great. And midway through the tour, one of the people in the tour comes over to me and points. "You're an archaeologist, aren't you?" Now I'm looking at myself. How is that broadcast? How do people know I'm an archaeologist? And I said, "Yeah, I am. How did you know?" And he said, "I saw you on that National Geographic special." I said, "Oh, which one?" Because I've been in a couple actually. And he said, "Oh, the ancient aliens, ancient astronauts." And I said, "Oh, good." And then he got very serious looking, got right up in my face and said, "You really shouldn't be so skeptical. You should have an open mind." And I said, "Okay, well, listen, as an archaeologist, of course I have an open mind, but an open mind that is demanding of direct physical evidence. And I just don't see the evidence, and there certainly is no necessity for a hypothesis that says ancient aliens landed on Earth and taught people how to do stuff. I think people are smart enough that they figured it all out all on their own." And he said, "Okay, sure, but how do you explain the fact that the Maya, native people in Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, how do you explain the fact that the Maya had a base 12 numbering system?" Now, this first took me back a little bit. It kind of caught me off guard because, number one, the Maya don't have a base 12 system. 20 is the important number in the Maya counting system, not 12. And what does that have to do with anything? It soon became obvious that the implication was the Maya have a base 12 numbering system because they have 6 fingers on each hand, meaning they're from another world. Okay, cool. I as gently as I could, I tried to explain to the gentleman that the whole notion that they had a base 12 system, that's not right. Their month, for example, is 20 days long. 20 is the number, which is 4 bars, 4 lines represent 20, where a bar represents 5 and a dot represents 1. The Maya had a brilliant writing system. They had the concept of the zero worked out completely independently from the folks in Mesopotamia. So the Maya were a brilliant culture. They figured these things out on their own, and there's no evidence that they had 6 fingers. We have the skeletons of Maya people, and they have, you know, the usual complement of fingers on each hand. They have 5 fingers on each hand. I didn't convince my friend, and he still was, as we left, he and his group left first, he just looked back at me and he said, well, I just want to encourage you to keep an open mind. I waved and smiled and kind of turned and said things under my breath I maybe shouldn't have. An open mind is great, but as the old saying goes, when your mind is totally open, you get a lot of garbage thrown in there, and you have to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff. You have to be able to filter out the nonsense. Keep the good stuff. Keep the stuff that is provable. Keep the stuff that has evidence to back it up. And the Maya having 6 fingers on each hand is certainly not something that's backed up by data. And the ancient astronaut hypothesis, the ancient aliens hypothesis, has nothing to recommend it, no evidence to support it. Now, I'm going to talk about Erich von Daniken. Erich von Daniken is kind of the godfather of ancient astronauts hypothesis, the ancient astronaut hypothesis. He's not the originator of it, though. It goes back further than von Daniken, but von Daniken certainly has been the most active popularizer, and he's been doing it for decades. Good for him. He's in his 80s. He's still around. He's still writing. He's still active, and that's great. But I don't think there's any evidence to back up his hypothesis and its multiple incarnations, and we'll talk about that in specifics. But as I said, von Daniken was not the developer. He wasn't the source of ancient astronaut. The idea that extraterrestrial aliens landed on Earth in antiquity and helped our ancestors develop technology. They're sort of like extraterrestrial Atlanteans, right? They're the source of all that is good in ancient society, and in modern society we owe to the space brothers and sisters. But here's an interesting kind of side note. I am not going to tell you that the ancient astronaut hypothesis was originated by people who are crazy or foolish or silly. And in return, the people who believe in ancient astronauts have to accept the fact that scientists are not closed-minded about this. Scientists are not impossible to convince. Scientists have not closed the door on the possibility that there's extraterrestrial life, extraterrestrial intelligences that may have visited the Earth in the past. But there's no evidence for that. And here's how I'm going to back that up. In 1963, an article was published called Direct Contact Among Galactic Civilizations by Relativistic Interstellar Spaceflight. That's just a fancy way of saying it was an article about the possibility that extraterrestrial life, this intelligent life, has developed ways of crossing huge spans of interstellar space, and that they have visited the Earth in the past. This is the key determination of that article published in 1963. The statistics presented earlier in this paper, so there's a bunch of math, suggest that the Earth has been visited by various galactic civilizations many times, possibly 10 to the 4, which is 10,000, during geological time, the 4.5 billion years the Earth has been around. It is not out of the question that artifacts of these visits still exist. Artifacts, that's the currency of archaeology. That's what archaeologists do. We discover and collect and analyze and interpret artifacts, objects that people made and used. So this person, really out there person, is saying that maybe 10,000 times over 4.5 billion years, folks from outer space arrived on Earth, landed, interacted with whatever creatures were here, and maybe even left behind objects that prove they were here. Now, who said that? That's not Erich von Daniken. That's not Giorgio Tsoukalos, the guy from Ancient Aliens. That's not some Ancient Aliens fan today. In fact, it's that guy. That's Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan, PhD, in astrophysics, a cosmologist, a physicist, an astronomer, and, for my money, the best science communicator who ever lived. He died too young, but I remember looking forward to his appearances on The Carson Show or his own series called Cosmos. He's a beautiful speaking voice and kind of unique and just absolutely brilliant writer. If you don't know Sagan's writings, go online and look up The Pale Blue Dot, where he talks about the context of Earth as seen from a very great distance away. It's just absolutely beautiful writing. So now Sagan is a very smart guy. And Sagan is writing an article in 63 saying, based on some math, how many stars there are in the galaxy, how many planets there must be around those stars, how many of those planets have life on them, have evolved life, how many of the planets have evolved life or that life has developed intelligence, how many planets on how many stars have evolved life, intelligent life, and that intelligent life has developed ways of radio communicating, or even have developed space travel, and even have developed the ability to travel at near light speed. And when you do the math, the number you start with is so enormous that even though the fraction is small each time you run it, by the time you're done, you have a lot of potential, of possible, based on the mathematical argument, the statistical argument. There may be a lot of life. The universe may be teeming with intelligent life, and some of that life may have developed space travel. And they could have come here. They could have come to Earth. Now, Sagan, I think towards the end of his life, was probably sorely disappointed that nobody, geologists, the article, the geologists and archaeologists hadn't found any evidence of that. The article even suggests that the most likely people to find these artifacts of extraterrestrial civilizations on Earth would be geologists who dig very deeply and dig into stratigraphic layers that are very, very ancient. And I think Sagan probably recognized that there certainly had never been found any supporting evidence for his hypothesis. And I think he was disappointed by that. And that still is the case. So I think that all scientists adhere to the Sagan perspective here. That is, it is at least statistically possible that civilizations from other galaxies, maybe not other galaxies, but other stars in our galaxy, have arrived on Earth in the past, and that there may be physical evidence left behind, a calling card, perhaps, or something left by accident, something dropped, something mistakenly left behind, and that someday we'll find it, and that will change everything. It just hasn't happened yet. That's actually, I have a PDF of Sagan's article. I'll be honest with you, I read it and I understand some of it, like the words. The math is beyond me for the most part, but I get what he's saying. Big flip here to the gentleman I spoke of previously, Eric von Daniken. Eric von Daniken has a long and checkered history that we don't need to get into, but has been now for decades writing about his ancient astronaut hypothesis. So he's presented here on the left with his, suave and sophisticated look when he was a kid, when he was much younger with his pipe, and there he is in a temple in Egypt showing this beautiful bas-relief, and he's got his matches and he's looking at this. He's not an archaeologist, he's not a historian, he's not a geologist, he's not a scientist. He's a writer. And if you ask me, he's a writer of fiction, but we will see. This was the book that sort of put him front and center in media. His book was Chariots of the Gods. The Chariots of the Gods are spaceships. Written in the English translation is 1968. It was first published in Europe under the title was, I think, Memories of the Future, which is, I like that title, actually. It's sort of cool. It sounds like a Moody Blues song, but that's, for those of you who are old enough to remember the Moody Blues, it sounds like a Moody Blues song. So von Daniken writes this book. It does remarkably well, and since that time has written 20, 30, I think it's close to 40 books now, translated into multiple languages. There have been multiple television shows devoted to Eric von Daniken. There's even a theme park, we'll talk about that towards the end. So here's the thing. Morning of the Magicians, just throw this in here, predates von Daniken by several years, and the authors of that book have an entire chapter, which is essentially the ancient astronaut hypothesis, as I will now detail it. And I don't believe in the first edition of von Daniken's book he credits these guys with coming up with the idea. But even they didn't come up with the idea. It predates a Russian scientist who are, again, suggesting that maybe, since we are at some point hopefully going to be sending things beyond the solar system, I think we have at least one satellite that now has crossed some of the furthest planets in the solar system, that maybe at some point other cultures have done the same, cultures on other planets. But here's, to get into the weeds here, the way I work it out, the way I break it down, I think that von Daniken essentially has three working claims, three working hypotheses. Right, so the first of the von Daniken hypotheses, human beings resulted not from evolution, but from a combination of alien and ancient ape genetic material. In other words, extraterrestrial aliens mated with our ancestors. You heard that right, folks. They mated with us. I don't know if you're thinking, well, that's really weird. That what? Guys from outer space land on Earth maybe 1 million years ago, or 2 million years ago, or 4 million years ago. They walk around and they see these ape-like creatures walking on 2 feet, and they mate with them and produce a hybrid? Now, there are those who rush to von Daniken's defense and say, well, he didn't really mean mate. He meant, like a genetic experiment. I have the receipts. I call this the horny astronaut hypothesis. If you're offended by that, you can call it the Emeritus astronaut hypothesis. But here's the deal. In an interview in 1974, here are the words of Erich von Daniken. I say in my books not only that we have been visited from outer space in ancient times, but that those visitors had sexual intercourse with our ancestors. Boy, that sounds like mating to me. So he says it out loud. What an insane kind of a thought. Here's why. On our own planet, we're all genetically related. All animals, all plants. We evolved here on Earth. It is extraordinarily difficult to find two different species on Earth who can mate and produce offspring, and the offspring are not sterile. Right? It's like very, very small possibilities. There are animals that, because they have the matching equipment, they can mate and they can have offspring, but the offspring are sterile. They can forcibly mate lions and tigers, artificial insemination, and produce amazingly looking animals who are not very healthy and who don't live very long, and they're infertile anyway. But the possibility, so that's a really low likelihood on Earth, the possibility of a creature who evolved on a different planet being able to mate with a creature who evolved on Earth, having the matching physical equipment and having the matching genetic material is not just zero, it's less than zero. Carl Sagan, again, my favorite SciComm author, actually said out loud to a documentarian that a human being would have be more likely successful mating with a petunia than with an extraterrestrial, because at least the petunia and the person evolved on Earth. I'll leave you with that image and we'll move on. This is an artist's conception of a couple of, I think they're Australopithecus afarensis. These are critters walking around on 2 feet 3.4, 3.5, 3.6 million years ago, leaving a footprint trail in the volcanic ash in eastern Africa. Now, they are very ape-like, although they do have the ability to walk on 2 feet. You'll notice a similarity between these guys and some of the reconstructions of Piltdown in one of the lectures in this series. I apologize for this, but it just strikes me as enormously funny. On the left is an image of a reconstruction of an Australopithecus afarensis male next to a female, and she is glancing over to this extraterrestrial alien, sort of posed seductively. And what are we supposed to believe? That she goes in the spaceship with this dude and they actually have sexual intercourse? Those are von Daniken's words. And what? There's our ultimate ancestor, this hybrid extraterrestrial human. He's a cute baby. But honestly, it's all nonsense. The biology shows us that what von Daniken is claiming here is an impossibility. There are very few things in science where you go, no, 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 absolutely impossible. I think I'll go out on a limb here and say, yeah, this is absolutely impossible. His second hypothesis is a little bit more interesting, I think. Ancient humans left behind pictorial representations and written descriptions that can be best explained as the images and descriptions by ancient human beings of their eyewitness encounters with extraterrestrial aliens. You get that? What he's saying is that long ago, our ancestors walking around, hunting woolly mammoth, collecting seeds and nuts, fishing in a river, hear a noise up in the sky, and they look up, and there's a flaming chariot in the sky, and it lands, and the human ancestors are hiding behind a bush, hiding behind a tree, and they see prehistoric E.T. getting out of the spaceship, collecting samples, getting back in the spaceship, and the spaceship leaves. And what do? They draw a picture on a cave wall of what they saw. There's actually one of the Star Trek movies where Spock is protecting a planet and he's inside a volcano. Native inhabitants of the planet actually see the Enterprise, and you see one draw it in the sand. Of course, it disappears. But it's the same idea. The idea here is that people looked up. Our human ancestors, our ancient ancestors, saw these extraterrestrials and then depicted them. So look in ancient art for spacesuit people who look like they're in spacesuits, people who look like they're flying around in rockets, because maybe those are the actual representations by our ancestors of what they experienced, of what they saw. And I call this the ink blot hypothesis. You know the old cliche of you take a piece of paper, you drop some ink on it, you squish it, open it up, and it forms this random image. And I suppose this actually was a thing that psychologists did. You're asked to describe the image. What do you see? And, maybe you see a butterfly, or you see a dragon, or you see a flower. And what you see is a reflection of what's in your head, because it's not really there. It's your imagination. So I think that, I call it the ink blot hypothesis, because I think largely people in the modern world look at an ancient work of art and they impose on it their perceptions, their perspective, but they don't know that culture. So it's like completely random. I'll give you examples. So this is easy. Some ancient art is representational. It sure looks like people saw something in their world, they drew it, and we can enjoy it thousands of years later. This is in Capitol Reef National Monument. It is a depiction of bighorn sheep, probably 2,000 or 3,000 years old, by native people. These are petroglyphs. They are pecked into the dark surface. That's pretty easy. It looks like sheep. And we know sheep live in the area. These bighorn sheep, they're wild animals. And we know that they were hunted because we find archaeological sites where they find their bones. So archaeology confirms our interpretation of what these things are. I mean, what's that, folks? It looks like a big old lizard or a newt. And sure enough, they live in the area. This is a site in Dinosaur National Monument, which is great Native American art. And we were hiking up to see these. There are a number of lizard depictions. And sure enough, as we're walking on the trail in front of us, there were dozens of lizards skittering around on the surface. So it was really cool. Yeah, it looks like a lizard to me. It probably was a lizard. It probably was what these people are attempting to do. They're depicting something that's in their environment. That's representational art. All cool. I love this one. This is a place called Newspaper Rock, which has dozens and dozens of separate images. It's not one big tableau. It's native people came there again and again and again at different times and put images together. This one certainly looks like, well, it's a person on horseback, which means it's post-contact, because the native folks didn't have horses before the Spanish introduced them in the 17th century. The person certainly looks like he's got a bow and arrow. It looks like there is an arrow, or could be a spear, that has hit the butt of that, probably a mule deer. The point here is, can't say with exactitude what's going on here, but it certainly looks like a hunter hunting an animal that's a deer some kind of a deer-like animal. It's recording a piece of history. It's a recording of something these people actually saw. Again, no problem, no big controversy. Here's a really interesting one. This is, you may recognize him as Kokopelli. Kokopelli is this interesting mythological figure in Hopi myth. He's the humpback flute player. So he plays this flute. He's a peddler. He goes from town to town and sometimes impregnates the women. It's a really interesting story. Kokopelli has kind of captured the public imagination. People have necklaces with Kokopelli, and I passed by a hotel that has a big, huge pink Kokopelli outside. So people are drawn to Kokopelli. But we know about Kokopelli by talking to the native people whose ancestors made these images. They tell us his name. They tell us who he is. So again, it's this wonderful amalgamation of archaeology and history and the people themselves, the indigenous people, explaining what these things mean. But should we assume that all images in ancient art are representational, actually depict things they saw, which is kind of what the ancient astronaut hypothesis, the Inkblot hypothesis, says, that if there's a creature there who to our eyes looks like an alien or a spaceship, that's what it must be. And I think that's a fundamental error in the interpretation of art. Those two paintings are by Pablo Picasso. Brilliant painter, creative genius. Nobody would say, oh my gosh, Picasso, he must have visited a place where people actually looked like that. No, we afford him credit for being imaginative, for having creativity. So we don't impose a natural or a real interpretation on his work. We admit, hey, this is from his imagination. It's the same with Magritte. I love Magritte. So here's a painting on the left of a typical Magritte with a guy in a kind of a gray suit with a big old green apple just floating in front of his face. And the other image on the right is just a bunch of guys in these dull gray suits floating over this landscape of houses. Did Magritte go someplace where gravity didn't work? Did he visit a planet where apples floated in front of people's faces? Well, nobody says that. We say Magritte was one weird dude. But interesting and fun. He was creative. He had imagination. And here's maybe my favorite. This is Salvador Dali. Did Dali visit a place where clocks were all melty and squishy? No. He's telling us something, not sure what, but it's really interesting. It's really creative. The guy's a genius. He's brilliant. He's creative. Well, those characteristics that we readily and happily apply to modern artists, it's mere conceit to think that ancient artists didn't also have creativity, imagination, and genius, and came up with images from their own minds, and they don't have to be representational. They're not necessarily things they saw, but just things they thought. Like this. Remember I showed you Kokopelli before. We know who Kokopelli is. That's a sheep playing a flute. Do we actually believe that the artist who produced this petroglyph in Utah saw a sheep playing the flute? If you want to believe that, that's fine. But I'd rather understand the artist who produced this incredibly creative, whimsical. It's, at least from my perspective, it's kind of whimsical. A sheep capelli, right? A sheep, a bighorn sheep playing a musical instrument. There actually are multiple examples. This is the only one I have personally seen, but there are multiple examples in the Southwest of art, mostly petroglyphs where it's pecked into the surface, where you've got animals playing the flute. So again, this guy's creative. The person, this man or woman who created this is amazing. That's fun. That's interesting. Again, we don't conclude from this that there really were sheep playing the flute. Now these are images from Southern California, petroglyphs. These are beautiful images of, call them anthropomorphs, meaning they kind of sort of look like humans in a way. So is the best interpretation of that, these dudes are wearing spacesuits. I mean, I've seen interpretations like that. Or these are images seen perhaps while having a vision. These are images that come to mind, and the artist put them on here as part of their art, their creativity. It takes so much less to simply ascribe genius to people than to believe that extraterrestrial aliens landed on Earth and they all wore different kinds of spacesuits. It's a lot less of a jump to say the person who produced this was absolutely brilliant artist, producing this kind of narrow-waisted, broad-shouldered anthropomorph with a show. Is that a shield? Is it some sort of spirit emanating from his hand? We don't know, but we do know, I think we know, that this is, hey, artists. They're interesting folks, and they come up with all kinds of interesting ideas. It may reflect a religious belief. It may reflect something sacred. It may reflect something just interesting, just strange, just captivating to the people who are going to see that art. This is perhaps one of the most impressive pieces of art I've ever seen. These are pictographs, so they're painted. This is in the Great Gallery in Utah. There are about 24 of these anthropomorphs, human size. Should we believe that humans back then, the people who painted this, actually saw humans or human-like creatures with no arms or legs? Or are these kinds of interesting spirit beings, perhaps seen in a vision, perhaps just invented to create a beautiful looking, interesting, sacred piece of art? Like I said, there are a couple of dozen of these spread across this one rock alcove at the Great Gallery in Canyonlands, Utah. This is one of my favorites, and here I will show you directly how ancient astronaut enthusiasts have actually glommed on to this. This is in Sagan Canyon, also in Utah. It is an amazing pictograph panel. Just incredible, incredible art. Beautiful, riveting, engaging. Notice how if they're aliens wearing spacesuits, each one has a different spacesuit. They're not the same. Do they have antennas? Are they communicating with antennas? My cell phone doesn't need an antenna. What, ancient aliens needed antennas on their spacesuits? But more to the point, this is from the International UFO Museum and Research Center in Roswell, New Mexico. Yeah, where the spaceship crashed in the 40s, or maybe not. They actually have a display where the images I just showed you, the rock art from Sagan Canyon, are presented as possibly representing extraterrestrial aliens in spacesuits. Now, come on, folks. I think it's insulting to the artists to impose this 20th or 21st century interpretation of what pretty clearly represent the creative genius of people, their ability to invent and make up images that maybe reflect something in their religion, in their belief system. Maybe these are sacred to them, but there is zero evidence that they're extraterrestrial aliens. And I'm here today, folks, to admit something for the first time in public. You know that Roswell site, spaceship crashed. I was on board that ship. And I was one of the few survivors. There I am in front of my compatriots, who are all dead. They're standing up anyway, but whatever. That's the spaceship that crashed in Roswell. That's actually a photograph of this interactive exhibit at the International Museum, UFO Museum in Roswell, where if you push a button, the spaceship goes round and round and smoke pours out of it. And you can see there are actually the mannequins of the extraterrestrial aliens who really didn't land on the spaceship that really didn't land in Roswell. But that's me in the front, so I have that extraterrestrial look about me. Perhaps the most famous of the inkblot hypothesis is the sarcophagus lid of this guy Pakal, Janish Janab Pakal, who was the Maya ruler of the city of Palenque. He was born in 603, the Common Era, or AD 603, and he lived to be an old guy. He died in 683, so about 80 years old. This is an image, and there is writing here that can be translated. The woman in the picture is his mother, Pakal's mother, and she is handing the crown to him, symbolically passing it along to him, and he became the king of Pakal. Now, when he died, He was buried in a pyramid, which is very rare in the Maya area. And he's buried at the base of that pyramid. There's a cross-section of what the pyramid looks like. Here's the pathway that leads down into it. And down at the bottom is the actual tomb. And you see that lid, that large piece of stone that is angled up? That's the sarcophagus lid. And that's the famous astronaut of Pakal. He is interpreted by some, including Erich von Daniken, as very clearly that is an astronaut landing on Earth or taking off. Well, that's just, really? Where von Daniken says, look, he's looking through some sort of a viewing device. He's not. That's a bone in his nose. Look, his hands are manipulating the panel of some sort of a rocket ship. No, they're not. But my favorite is his foot. It's operating a pedal. It has something to do with the spaceship taking off. This is one of those old-style spaceships. Maybe it's like a clutch. You know, he's got to depress the clutch to change the speed of the spaceship. Mayanists know by reading the Maya language that this is a depiction of Pakal suspended between death, the Maya heaven above, and the earth monsters below. And why is that on his sarcophagus lid? Because he's dead. He died. And they're taking care of his spirit for the afterlife. That cross-shaped device is called it's the tree of life for the Maya. On top of the cross-shaped device is a quetzalcoatl, a bird that represents heaven. So everything, all the individual images in this sarcophagus lid are interpretable by folks who know how to read the Maya language, who know Maya iconography. There's nothing about him being an extraterrestrial alien. And to add insult to injury, his bones, his body, are found in the sarcophagus. He doesn't have 6 fingers on each hand. He's not weird or extraterrestrial. His body is that of a human being. His skeleton looks like the skeleton of a human being. He's not an extraterrestrial alien. The third and final hypothesis is that the archaeological and historical records are filled with examples of great leaps in technology, impossible for human beings to have conceived without help from above. Our ancestors needed an extraterrestrial Peace Corps. I mean, essentially, this is the ultimate insult. Human beings couldn't have invented pyramids, couldn't have invented agriculture, couldn't have invented the arch, couldn't have invented metallurgy, and on and on and on. But in this case, we're not pointing to a place in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and saying, oh yeah, that's where they got it from. We're pointing up to the sky, up to the heavens, where the extraterrestrials came and gave our poor primitive ancestors technology and knowledge. Our ancestors, the dummies. So think about the kind of stereotypically interesting, fascinating, sophisticated archaeological sites across the world. Places like Easter Island with the moai, these beautiful, amazing carvings, where we have the quarries where they were carved. We have the stones used to quarry these things. We pretty much know how they were dragged into place and erected. But no, von Daniken says it was extraterrestrials levitating them into place. Evidence for that? Well, no. There they are. There are a couple of these statues in the original quarries. The Maya we hearing about again and again and again. This is Uxmal, this spectacular place with a pyramid with an oval footprint. This is, I've used this before. This is the Temple of the Feathered Serpent at Chichen Itza, this amazing temple that has 91 steps on each side. Multiply that, so there are 4 times that, it's 364, and the top is the 365th step. 365 days in the year. The Maya had 2 calendars, one with 365 days, one with 260 days, and they had a brilliant way of coordinating them. It was based on their observations of celestial objects. Quite remarkable. This is the site of Pakal. 60,000 people lived in Pakal. It's a city in Mesoamerica with this beautiful temple of the jaguar. Steps leading up to the top, a temple up on top. This is, again, Chichen Itza. The site is called the Observatory, and we actually believe that it was used to sight the horizon as an archaeoastronomical tool. And again, These are things that we see evolving. We see people developing them. We see people accomplishing them. And there's no evidence of any outside help. They didn't need outside help. They were fully capable of accomplishing this on their own. And Egypt, which is perhaps the place that garners the most interest, the pyramids, the Sphinx, Abu Simbel. Now, in the lecture on Atlantis, I said, look, here's Donnelly admitting he's got no evidence, but that maybe someday there will be evidence. Eric von Daniken, on his website, has done exactly the same thing. Until today, I have collected hundreds of outstanding signs that show that the Earth was once visited by aliens. But I don't have any single objective proof. For example, an artificially made object that doesn't come from this planet that one could show triumphantly to science. My greatest wish would be that someone, who doesn't have to be me myself, finds such an object and presents it still during my lifetime. That is Eric von Daniken being honest, saying, well, I don't actually have any direct evidence of anything that I'm saying, but maybe someday we'll find it. That's exactly like Donnelly saying, well, we don't have any evidence yet, but maybe someday there'll be evidence of Atlantis. If wishes were fishes, we'd all cast our nets in the sea. It's nice to wish and hope that there will be evidence forthcoming, but until that evidence is forthcoming, that hypothesis goes on a shelf and collects dust. We don't necessarily throw it away. We just say there's no evidence for it. And if evidence is forthcoming, we'll dust it off and bring it back out. But for Atlantis, for ancient aliens, there just is no evidence. Now, I told you there is a theme park devoted to Eric von Daniken's hypotheses. This is in Switzerland. It was originally called Mystery Park. It was opened between 2003 and 2006, closed down, not enough interest. It's now called Jungfrau Park, 2009 to the present. It is open intermittently. Each of those buildings in that photograph represent another one of von Daniken's mysteries. The thing I'm going to end with here is how fundamentally insulting the von Daniken and ancient astronaut hypothesis is. And I did this back in the 1980s. I read Chariots of the Gods, and I broke it down by continent. Say, well, where are these things that are so spectacular that mere humans couldn't have accomplished it? And I noticed there was a certain lack of a number of examples from Europe. But everywhere where there were brown-skinned people, von Daniken found tons of evidence of their ineptitude, right? That they couldn't figure out pyramids or agriculture or writing or metallurgy on their own. So they must have had help from the outside. Now, there are people who say, oh, Fader, you're an academic. You're one of those guys. You look for racism everywhere. All right, if you don't like my statistics, how about these quotes? Eric von Daniken. We have the receipts. Eric, Signs of the Gods, 1980. These are all direct quotes. Were the extraterrestrials able to opt between different races from the beginning? Did they endow different human groups with different abilities to survive in different climatic and geographic conditions? Okay, well, that sounds a little weird. What's next? I quite understand that I am playing with dynamite if I ask whether the extraterrestrials allotted specific tasks to the basic races from the very beginning, i.e. programmed them with special abilities. What? So different races have different abilities, and those were given by the aliens? I wonder who Eric thinks have the abilities in like math and science. Well, we know when he talks about black people, nearly all Negroes are musical. They have rhythm in their blood. Yes, somebody wrote this and actually sent it out there to the world and put his name on it. Oh, was the black race a failure? And did the extraterrestrials change the genetic code by gene surgery and then program a white or yellow race? If you are an African American, if you are African, if you are black, he is saying you're a mistake. And aliens fix that mistake by making white people and Asian people. Don't tell me that's not racist. That's the poster child for racism. Once this basic question is accepted, we cannot and should not avoid the explosive sequel. Is there a chosen race? I think we know which race von Daniken thinks the aliens chose. It's racist at its core. And now I'm going to leave you here with this wonderful comic from Reza Farazmand. His material is posted online under Poorly Drawn Lines, and it's his contribution to ancient aliens. And here, the ancient aliens have landed on Earth in these people are living in little huts, and the aliens say, "We are gods, and go build me some pyramids," and the people do, and then carve me in stone, and the people do. Carve me in more stone, and then the aliens are mad, and they blow up the pyramids, and eventually they leave, and they say, "Peace out, bitches," and away they go. Yeah, go check out his website with his comics in there. They're really quite funny, and ultimately, his exposure of the silliness of ancient aliens is, I think, one of the best responses to the whole thing.